It's Dramatic Listening, the podcast where you learn English by listening to radio plays. I'm your host and teacher, Wendy Lambert. Welcome back to Dramatic Listening. This is episode 95, and it's the final episode of Ticket to Tangier, a Harry Lime radio play. And I'm calling this one, Why Harry's Conscience is Clear. Now, your conscience is that little voice inside you that tells you when you did something wrong. When you go against your morals, you feel guilty about it. When that happens, you have two choices: confess and make it right, or bury your conscience. Burying it is actually not a good idea because after a while, your conscience won't bother you anymore. You'll become hardened and won't care when you hurt other people. But Harry's conscience wasn't bothering him at all. No little nagging voice saying, "You shouldn't have done that." So either, in his eyes, he didn't do anything wrong, or he's buried his conscience so many times that he's now a hardened criminal. After listening today, you can decide which it is. As usual, this story is serialized on Dramatic Listening. This is the last one of the 7 episodes that make up the whole story. This story started with episode 89. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, or you've missed some of them in between, you really should go back to episode 89 and start listening there. Dramatic listening is edutainment. Now that's a combination of education and entertainment. It's all part of helping you keep up your momentum in your English studies. By making learning fun and giving you something entertaining to listen to, I hope to keep you interested and motivated. The podcast is now one part of my larger ESL site called English Momentum. I hope you drop by EnglishMomentum.com to check out the site, but also to get the free PDF that comes with each episode of this podcast. Just register and log in. Registration is free. As a logged-in member, you can download the free PDF. In it, you'll find the vocabulary and the transcript for the podcast episode to help you learn the words and read along. There's a new PDF with each episode. So I really encourage you to head on over to EnglishMomentum.com and become a member today. As I said, today we're listening to part 7 of Ticket to Tangier, an old-time radio play from The Lives of Harry Lime that was first aired back in 1951. You'll remember from our last episode that Harry and Patsy got an unexpected visit from a gangster who wanted the heroin. He had had some business dealings with Patsy's husband and knew about the heroin. It didn't end well for the gangster. Harry distracted him, and Patsy shot him. In today's episode, it's every man for himself. When the police raid the mansion, Harry goes one way and Patsy another. But what should they do with the heroin? Should they abandon the heroin and run, or take it and risk being caught with it? We'll listen to Act 3 shortly, but first we have 22 key words to learn. And remember, these words are all posted on Quizlet, So if you're a Chinese speaker, you could learn these words with English Chinese flashcards and games at www.englishmomentum.com/Quizlet. And now for the key words. I'll be giving you the word, the meaning, and a model sentence for each one. Our first word is stoop. Stoop is a verb and it means bend over. So you bend over at the waist. If you drop something on the floor, you might stoop to pick it up. In Chinese, wan yao or fushen. When I stooped to pick up my heavy bag, I hurt my back. Should have used my knees instead. Stoop. Word number 2, dough. Dough. This is spelled D-O-U-G-H, and it has 2 meanings. The first meaning is unbaked bread. So it's ready to rise and then be put in the oven. But it hasn't been baked yet, so it's dough. The second meaning is slang. Dough is slang for money. So in Chinese, these 2 meanings, it could be mian tuan or it could be qian. Wow, that's a lot of dough, my friend said as she watched me pay for my new car in cash. Dough. Word number 3, douse. Douse. This is a verb, and it means to pour water over something to put it out. For example, a fire. So if something's burning, you might douse it with water. In Chinese, nongxi or po shui. Before you leave your campsite, make sure you douse the fire pit. Douse. Word number 4, impulsive. Impulsive is an adjective, and it describes someone who tends to do things suddenly without careful thought. So someone who is impulsive acts on impulse. In Chinese, we would say fu zao or lu meng. My friend is an impulsive buyer. He doesn't think about whether he can really afford something. If he wants it, he buys it. Impulsive. Word number 5, firearm. Firearm is a noun and it means a weapon that uses gunpowder or a small gun, like a revolver or a rifle, something like that. So, chang or huoqi or chang pao, a firearm. He drove right through the police check stop because he had illegal firearms in the trunk of his car. Firearm. Word number 6, overcrowded. This is an adjective and it describes a place that is crowded too much. There are too many people or too many animals or too many of something in one place. In Chinese, we would say yongji bukan. If the fish are overcrowded, you'll have problems with disease. So don't put too many fish in your fish tank. Overcrowded. Word number 7, scram. Scram is a verb and it means to leave immediately. It's kind of slang. So in Chinese, gunkai or kuaishan. Oh, look, the cat killed a bird. Go on, you cats. Get out of here. Scram. Scram. Word number 8, funny. This is an adjective, and here it has the meaning of tricky. So in Chinese, 狡猾 or 诡诈. Keep your hands up where I can see them. No funny business. So someone who's holding a gun on someone else might say this. No funny business. Don't do anything tricky. Word number 9, make out. Make out can have many different meanings, but the one for this story is cope. So this is a 2-word verb, and it means you can cope with something, you can handle it. So 对付 or 应付 in Chinese. When my brother went to college, we all wondered how he'd make out looking after himself for a change. Make out. How would he handle that? How would he cope with it? Word number 10, heroin or heroin. Now, this is not the drug. This is spelled with an E on the end of the word, so Heroine. And this is the female form of hero. So this is a female hero, the female protagonist. So although it can sound exactly the same as the word for the drug, heroin, it can also mean a female hero when it has the E on the end of the word. That is what it means. The main female character in the story is the heroine. So in Chinese, 女主角 or 巾帼英雄. Stories like The Hobbit are lacking in heroines. They're all heroes, not heroines. Word number 11, tip off. This is a 2-word verb, and it means to tell the police some information that could help them solve a crime. In Chinese, 密告 or 通风报信. The bank robber looked out the window and exclaimed, "Look at all the cops out there. Somebody must have tipped them off that this is our hideout." Tip off. Word number 12, wedge. Wedge. A wedge is a noun, and it's something that is shaped like a triangle. It has 3 sides. So in Chinese, xie or xie xing wu. If you put a wedge under the open door, it won't swing shut in the wind. Wedge. Word number 13, wage. Wage. Now these words sound similar. I hope you can hear the difference. This is a noun, and it means payment on an hourly basis for work done. So what is your wage? How much do you make an hour? It can also mean to give or do something in return. So there's either recompense if you did something bad, or reward if you did something good. So you get what you deserve. That's also your wages. So in Chinese, it could be 薪水, that's the primary meaning, but it can also mean 酬劳 or 恶报, 善有善报, 恶有恶报, 若人不报时辰未到. The policeman looked at the mangled car and thought, "That's the wages of driving so recklessly fast." Wage. Word number 14, bush. A bush is a noun. This is the word for a small tree. It has many branches and no trunk. So there's no main trunk, but all these branches come out from near the ground. In Chinese, guan mu, or ai shu cong. Lots of birds came to eat the red berries that grow on the bushes around our house. Bush. Word number 15 is an idiom, so a whole phrase. The word was out. The word was out means something became publicly known. Everybody had heard. Chuanyan, or Ko'er Xiang Chuan, or Feng Chuan in Chinese. Word is out that Blaze has the best chance of winning the horse race. Word was out. Word number 16, consignment. Consignment. This is a noun, and it's the quantity of goods that are shipped to a dealer who only pays for what is sold, and he can ship the unsold goods back. In Chinese, that would be ji mai pin. The shop got in a consignment of winter boots. Consignment. So at the end of the winter season, if they haven't sold them all, they can send them back. Word number 17, don't approve of. So I'm giving this whole phrase to you. It's not an idiom, but I just want to talk about it as a phrase. So this is a verb phrase followed by a preposition of. So if you don't approve of something, it means you don't agree with it. You find it unacceptable or bad. In Chinese, 不以为然 or 不认同. His parents didn't approve of his friends because they smoked. Don't approve of. Word number 18, confectioner's sugar. Okay, again, it's a phrase, but it's describing one kind of sugar. So confectioner's sugar is a powdery sugar that is also called icing sugar. So you might use it when you make icing for a cake. Confectioner's sugar in Chinese, tangfen. We could make icing for the cake if we have enough confectioner's sugar. Confectioner's sugar. Word number 19, conscience. Conscience. This is a noun, and it's that part of your mind that makes you aware that your actions were either morally right or wrong. Tianliang in Chinese. To have a clear conscience in Chinese is wu kui. So nothing's bothering you. Nothing's telling you, hey, you did something wrong. Wu kui. To have a clear conscience. After stealing the CD, his conscience bothered him so much that he took it back to the store and confessed. Conscience. Word number 20, prayer rug. This is two words. It's a noun. It's describing a certain kind of rug or small carpet. So a prayer rug is a small carpet that Muslims kneel on when they pray. Guitan, prayer rug. 5 times a day, the Muslim man would place his prayer rug on the floor facing Mecca, kneel on it, and touch his forehead to the rug in prayer. Prayer rug. Word number 21, syndicate. This is a noun, and it's a loosely associated group of racketeers who are involved in an organized crime. Okay, there are other meanings of syndicate as well, but in this story, it's this group of dishonest businessmen involved in organized crime. In Chinese, Heibang syndicate. The syndicate of gangsters agreed on the street price of the drugs. Syndicate. And finally, word number 22, desperate. Desperate is an adjective that describes someone who's suffering extreme need or anxiety. So you might be desperate for something, desperate for money. 大汉望云霓. Or if it hasn't rained for a long time and your crops aren't growing, you would be desperate for rain. Desperate. There are a lot of desperate merchants wanting to hustle our product. Desperate. Well, that's it for our key words. Let's listen now to Ticket to Tangier, Act 3. This part of the play is about 5 minutes long.
We'd better get out of here.
Now, isn't that funny? That's just what I was going to suggest.
Take the heroin. You can carry it just as it is in the rug.
No, thanks. I have a bad back and I hate to stoop over. Why don't we just leave it where it is?
Let the cops find it and give up $100,000 worth of dough, you crazy?
Not crazy enough to argue with you as long as you're holding that gun, Patsy, but...
What's that?
Well, what do you think?
Maybe it's the police.
Either that or it's New Year's Eve. Douse the lights on it.
Right.
Okay, and now? That's much better.
Why, you...
We've got darkness, and I've got the gun.
Give it back to me.
You're too impulsive for firearms, Mrs. Magetti. I'm keeping the gun.
The cops.
Sure,
They're
it's the
here.
cops. Your husband built a nice big house, but it's getting a bit overcrowded. If you don't mind the suggestion, I think we better scram just 2 feet ahead of me, Mrs. Magetti, and don't try anything funny.
You dirty...
Keep your seatbelt fastened. We're coming in. We made our way out through the garden. The cops were all over the place, and after a while it was clear that our only hope was in separating. Patsy, you go through the shrubbery. Keep straight on down the field till you get to town. You can, mister. Just keep going down the road.
What about you?
I'll make out all right.
Yes, but what about the heroin?
Heroin? There isn't any heroin in this story, Mrs. Magetti. Just a hero. That's a joke, honey. You can laugh at it later when you catch your plane to Dakar.
Harry Lime returns in just a moment. And now, Harry Lime.
Of course, they got her. They took her off the plane on the return run to Paris. Somebody tipped off the police about that murder. It's what you might call the wages of Lime. It's another joke, but you don't have to laugh at it. I'll do the laughing. You see, what Patsy didn't know was that I had picked up the rug in the darkness and hid it under a bush just outside the window. I came back later and collected it. Of course, the word was out about Rico's big consignment, and didn't have any trouble getting a good price in Marseille the next week. But honestly, I don't approve of drugs. That's why I threw the original stuff into the Bay of Tangier and delivered to the gangsters 7 nicely wrapped packages of confectioner's sugar. They tell me you can get the habit for sugar, too, but my conscience is clear, all except for one thing, that little prayer rug it was wrapped in. I know it didn't belong to me, but it looks very nice here in front of the tea table, don't you think so? Will you have milk or lemon with your tea? And how much sugar? This is the very best brand, you know. A syndicate of desperate gangsters paid me $50,000 for only 7 packages of the same quality.
And now it's time for the walkthrough. Harry and Mrs. Magetti, Patsy, hear the police car sirens and they know they're about to be caught. So what should they do? Harry wants to just run, but Mrs. Magetti wants him to take the heroin with him. He says, "No thanks, I have a bad back. I don't want to bend over. So 我不要弯腰，我不要俯身." So he uses that as an excuse, of course, but really he doesn't want to get caught with the heroin. And she says, "You're crazy. It's worth $100,000. That's a lot of dough. That's a lot of money." And he says, "Quick, hurry, douse the lights." Now, if the lights were a torch and there was a flame of fire, you would literally douse them. You could put water on them to turn them out. We're probably talking about electricity here. You don't want to put water on it, but you can still use the same expression. So douse the lights. 泼水灯, quickly put out the lights so the police don't know we're here. As soon as Mrs. Magetti turns out the lights, Harry jumps her and he takes the gun from her. He explains, because it's a radio play, "We've got darkness and I've got the gun." She says, "You give it back to me." And he says, "No, you're too impulsive for guns. You're too impulsive for firearms, Mrs. Magetti. You do things suddenly without careful thought. You act on impulse. 浮躁. So I'm going to keep the gun." He says, "I'm going to keep the firearm." 火器, the firearm. And then they hear the cops right at the door, banging on the door. Harry says, "It's getting too crowded in here. It's overcrowded. If even one cop comes through that door, it's too crowded for Harry and for Mrs. Magetti." Harry says, "We'd better scram. We need to run away fast. Scram. Gunkai." But he still wants to keep control of Mrs. Magetti. He still wants to hold the gun on her. So he tells her, 2 feet ahead of me, and don't try anything funny. Don't be up to any tricks. Don't try to fool me. Don't try anything tricky, 狡猾 or 诡诈. They got out into the garden, and Harry realized that the best thing they could do was go in 2 different directions. It would be harder for the police to catch both of them if they went 2 different ways. So he tells Mrs. Magetti, "Go that way through the strawberry patch." And she says, "Well, what about you?" And he says, "I'll make out all right. I can cope. I can look after myself." 我会对付. And she says, "Yes, but what about the heroin? What about the drugs? Who's going to carry the drugs? Are we really leaving them here?" Harry says, "Heroin? There isn't any heroin in this story, Mrs. Magetti, just a hero." So he's playing with this word that sounds the same for heroin, the drug, and heroine, the female hero. So he says, "There's no heroine. There's no female hero in this story, just a hero. He says, that's a joke, honey. You can laugh at it later. At this point, there's a break, and it moves on to a new scene. We meet up with Harry again in his apartment or his house, and he tells us what really happened. He says, of course, they got her. The police caught up with Mrs. Magetti. They arrested her. Somebody had tipped them off about the murder. Somebody had told the police, hey, there's not only heroin involved here, she's the one who killed Rico Magetti. So Harry says, 有人密告警察. He says you might call it the wedges of lime. Well, a wedge of lime is a slice of a lime, a fruit, and you might put a wedge of lime on your iced tea or on a drink, an alcoholic drink. But again, he's playing with two words that sound very similar, wedges and wages. And also lime and perhaps lying. Okay, so the wedges of lime could mean the wages of lying. This is what you get for lying. Or this is what you get for trying to be tricky with me, Harry Lime, the same as his last name. He says that's another joke, but you don't have to laugh at it. I'll do the laughing. I think it's funny. You got caught. Ha ha, you got what you deserved, but I didn't. So the wedges, shishing wu, are really wages, what you deserve. Chou lao or bao. But what really happened to the heroin, the drugs in this story? Well, Harry says, while it was dark, I hid the rolled up carpet with the heroin in it under a bush just outside the window. It was too dark and Mrs. Magetti didn't see me do it. I put them under this little tree, this bush, guan mu. And I went back later and I got it. He says, of course, the word was out about Rico's big consignment. So the word was out. It was public knowledge, at least among the gangsters and people that wanted to buy it. Everybody knew that Rico had this large shipment of drugs, this big consignment, Jimaipin. So I didn't have any trouble getting rid of it, he says. I got a good price in Marseille the next week. Then he says, but honestly, I don't approve of drugs. 我不以为然毒品, or 我不认同毒品. He doesn't approve of drugs, and yet he took the drugs and he sold them. They're out there on the market. But he says, not really. I threw those drugs into the Bay of Tangier. I just dumped it in the water. And instead of drugs, I sold the gangsters wrapped up packages of confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar, icing sugar. 事实上，我卖给他们的东西都是糖分而已，不是毒品。Harry says, well, I've heard that sugar is also addictive. You can get hooked on sugar. It makes you want to eat more sugar. But my conscience is clear, he says. 我的天良是无愧. I have a clear conscience. It doesn't bother me because it's not drugs. All except for one little thing. I did do something wrong, he says. That little prayer rug that the drugs were wrapped up in, well, I really liked the rug, so I kept it. So he stole the rug, 那个小柜台, and he kept it. He stole it because he liked it, but it doesn't bother him too much. And he asks us, so what do you think? Don't you like it? It's right there in front of my tea table. Don't you think it looks good in my house? So this puts us, the listeners, in his living room with him, listening to his story about what happened in Tangier. And he asks, will you have milk or lemon with your tea? So here we are with Harry Lime drinking tea together in his living room. And he asks, and how much sugar? How much sugar would you like in your tea? And he comments on the sugar. He says, this is the very best brand, you know, the very best sugar. How do I know? Because a syndicate of desperate gangsters, this whole group of gangsters that really wanted to buy stuff from me, paid me $50,000 for only 7 packages of the very same thing. 那个分不顾身的黑帮买给我5万块. So he says those gangsters were really desperate. They thought they were going to miss out on the deal, and they paid me all this money. They didn't check the drugs very carefully, and they bought my sugar. Well, that's it for the walkthrough. Let's listen again to Act 3.
You better get out of here.
Now, isn't that funny? That's just what I was going to suggest.
Take the heroin. You can carry it just as it is in the rug.
No, thanks. I have a bad back, and I hate to stoop over. Why don't we just leave it where it is?
Let the cops find it and give up $100,000 worth of dough. You crazy?
Not crazy enough to argue with you as long as you're holding that gun, Patsy, but...
What's that?
Well, what do you think?
Maybe it's the police.
Either that or it's New Year's Eve. Douse the lights on it.
Right.
Okay, and now? That's much better.
Why, you...
We've got darkness, and I've got the gun.
Give it back to me.
You're too impulsive for firearms, Mrs. Magetti. I'm keeping the gun.
The cops.
Sure,
They're
the
here.
cops. Your husband built a nice big house, but it's getting a bit overcrowded. If you don't mind the suggestion, I think we better scram just 2 feet ahead of me, Mrs. Magetti, and don't try anything funny.
You
Keep your seatbelt fastened. We're coming in. We made our way out through the garden. The cops were all over the place, and after a while it was clear that our only hope was in separating. Patsy, you go through the shrubbery. Keep straight on down the field till you get to town. You can, mister. Just keep going down the road.
What about you?
I'll make out all right.
Yes, but what about the heroin?
Heroin? There isn't any heroin in this story, Mrs. Magetti. Just a hero. That's a joke, honey. You can laugh at it later when you catch your plane to Dakar.
Harry Lime returns in just a moment. And now, Harry Lime.
Of course, they got her. They took her off the plane on the return round to Paris. Somebody tipped off the police about that murder. It's what you might call the wages of lying. It's another joke, but you don't have to laugh at it. I'll do the laughing. You see, what Patsy didn't know was that I had picked up the rug in the darkness and hid it under a bush just outside the window. I came back later and collected it. Of course, the word was out about Rico's big consignment, and didn't have any trouble getting a good price in Marseille the next week. But honestly, I don't approve of drugs. That's why I threw the original stuff into the Bay of Tangier and delivered to the gangsters 7 nicely wrapped packages of confectioner's sugar. They tell me you can get the habit for sugar, too, but my conscience is clear, all except for one thing, that little prayer rug it was wrapped in. I know it didn't belong to me, but It looks very nice here in front of the tea table, don't you think so? Will you have milk or lemon with your tea? And how much sugar? This is the very best brand, you know. A syndicate of desperate gangsters paid me $50,000 for only 7 packages of the same quality.
Okay, let's talk about it. You know, Harry couldn't resist. Here was his opportunity to grab a quick buck. So he went back for the heroin, the drug, and he made a lot of money on it. Although he tricked his buyers, his conscience doesn't bother him. What do you think of Harry's method of disposing of the heroin? Harry's not a friend of the police, so why did he tip them off about who the murderer was? It was obviously Harry who tipped them off because he said it was the wages of Lime. So Harry Lime told the police, hey, Mrs Magetti killed Rico. What do you think of Harry? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Tell me all about it in the comments below the show notes at www.englishmomentum.com/DL095. Remember, you need to be logged in to comment on the blog posts. Or you can also leave a comment on my Facebook page at facebook.com/EnglishMomentum. Remember, the English-Chinese flashcards and games are available on Quizlet at englishmomentum.com/Quizlet. And for anyone who wants to review the vocabulary and read the radio play transcript, that bonus PDF is now at englishmomentum.com. Log into English Momentum, go to this podcast, DL095, and you'll be able to download the bonus PDF. You could also be listening to Dramatic Listening on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. You'll find a link to Stitcher in my show notes at englishmomentum.com. Well, folks, That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining me again this week. If you've enjoyed the story, please share it with a friend. See you again in 2 weeks with a whole new story. Bye for now.